when I started selling drugs, I realized that, bro, there's a drug dealer on every corner.
Tiana Reyes was the change in your life, and the judges were the chance.
She was in her dress uniform. She had on her medals and everything. I made it through Africa. I made it through the Bronx. I made it in the SEAL training. I made it to Hell Week. That's where I was like, man, if I don't stop, I'm going to either end up dead or in prison.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Hamid Jassim, author of The Terrorist Whisperer and host of The Black Side Show. In today's episode, we bring you Remi Adeleke, movie director, writer, former Navy SEAL, and more shocking, former drug dealer. The son of a Nigerian royal goes from having a silver spoon in his mouth to absolutely nothing, living in Bronx, New York. Make sure you like and subscribe. Enjoy the show. So how do you go, Remi, from being a Nigerian royal to living in Bronx, New York?
Yeah, man. First off, I want to say thank you, my brother, for having me on. My brothers, excuse me, for having me on. It's an honor and blessing to be on your platform and share. You know how many we go back. Can't say way back, but we go back. So it's good to have you on, my dude. It's good to be on your platform, my brother. You know, my story really starts with my dad's story. My dad was he was the firstborn son to my grandfather. My grandfather had 9 wives. He kept on having girls, and finally my dad came along. And my grandfather was a chief in the Yoruba tribe. In Western culture, we refer to royalty as prince, princess, Dutch, lord, that sort of thing. Well, in African culture, especially West African culture, royalty is referred to as chief and or your last name, Adeleke. So, you know, my last name, Adeleke, Ade means crown, Leke means a supreme. And then my full name is actually Ade Remi, which means the crown has appeased me. So my dad just naturally inherited that title of chief, being the firstborn son, and then he also inherited the last name. So he was royalty. He was a chief in the Yoruba tribe. Fast forward, he ended up moving down to the south of Nigeria, ended up getting educated in science, literature, a lot of Western topics, ended up getting a full ride scholarship to study engineering and architecture in London, and just crushed it. You know, he was brilliant. He was a savant. He was way ahead of his time, as so many people said. He was one of the first black men on the board of the World Trade Center in New York City. His best friend was the architect of the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers. He was the first black man on the board of the British Financial Planning Council. He had started multiple engineering firms. I mean, he was just absolutely crushing everything that he did. But, as you know, he had a passion for his people. You know, he had a passion for Africa and Nigerians, and he felt that Nigeria, being, you know, rich in resources, gold, cocoa, natural gas, oil, if handled right, can be greater than any Western nation. And so he went back to Nigeria with the plans of creating a financial sector in Nigeria where people from all around the world and Africa could come to can do commerce, can do business, can do trade. And it was going to be called in part the World Trade Center Africa, you know? And so he came back to Nigeria. He bought a massive plot of land, 8 million pounds was how much he spent. It was called Maroko. There was a military coup that took place. The Nigerian government was overthrown, and my dad's land that he purchased was essentially taken from him. Fast forward about 10 years later, the democracy was reinstated, and my dad went to court, and the federal government said, hey, what do you want? We can't give you back Maroko, but what do you want? And my dad said, well, I want this swamp. There was a swamp off the coast of Lagos, which was essentially a lagoon, but it was a dirty swamp. And he said, that's what I want. And they all laughed at him. They were like, what are you going to do with that? It's a swamp. And he said, don't worry about it. See, because my dad was such a visionary, he figured that if I create something where there was never something, no one could ever come back and say that it was ever theirs. And so this is kind of where I came along. I was born and I came into the picture. And so when I came into the picture, I was born in the riches. My dad was a multimillionaire. We traveled the world. We had nannies, cars, drivers. My dad would host lavish parties where with dignitaries from all around the world would come. We had multiple different, places. We didn't live in a house. We lived on a compound. Like, I didn't want for anything. Like, when I said I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. And then I also had the title of being royalty, Remi Adeleke, right?
Wow.
But unfortunately, corruption. There's a lot of corruption in the Nigerian government. You could speak to this in your country as well, where you're from. The corruption that takes place in government.
Yeah.
And that's what essentially did my dad in. Right after he hired Dutch engineers to dredge the foreshore, they dredged the foreshore and created an island, which was called the Lagoon Development Project. Fast forward to this day, it's called Banana Island. Some of the richest Africans in the world live on Banana Island. They have a property on my dad's land.
And that's what the swamp. That's what he turned from swamp to this.
Into an island. This was one of the first man-made islands in the world. He was one of the. He wasn't the first, but he was one of the first to do it. And as soon as the land had formed, and he signed contracts with Disney, Marks and Spence, McDonald's, other companies to have buildings and offices in here on this island in Nigeria. As soon as that was all said and done, the Lagos state government came in and said, you were never supposed to get this. The federal government was never supposed to award you this swamp. It belongs to us because it's X amount of miles off of the shore of Lagos state. It's corruption though, because if that was the case, why wouldn't you say that to him before he started dredging the foreshore? All of the people knew what he was doing.
Every time he created a vision, they would put a block right in front of him.
Exactly. And I tell people all the time, people who try to bash on America and say it's not the land of opportunity. Listen, man, my dad came to the West and became a millionaire. He went to Nigeria to try to do something for his people, and he lost everything and died. And I came from there with nothing, came here, and now I'm as rich as my dad was probably before he died. Before what happened to him happened to him. And I know you can attest to that too, having come from Iraq. You know what I mean? And then coming here.
You have no idea how much I could resonate with this, because how many people could have done something great for Iraq and end up leaving for the same exact reason? And I cannot imagine what could he have done in Nigeria if this corruption didn't stop him.
Exactly. I mean, bro, Nigeria would have been, in my opinion, it'd have been like UAE.
Wow.
Because that's how much of a visionary my dad was.
Yep, and that's exactly how the UAE thought about it when they were just a desert. I mean, look, he's a man that looked at a swamp and turned it into an island. Yeah. Still, he started the idea. He made it. Yeah. And that's exactly what the UAE had. The UAE didn't have a swamp, had all desert. Their sand could not grow any trees. They changed the sand. But to see it like his dad led, like that's just, like the loss of his life is bigger loss for that country than anything else.
Yeah. Remi, you said your father was killed. How was he killed?
Well, I hate to use the word killed. So essentially what happened was the Nigerian government, Lagos state government, stripped the island from him. He went to court, was fighting them in court like immediately, and he died weeks later. Okay. Now, how did he die? He was super stressed out after a court day. He had a day in court, was super stressed out, went for a walk. His neighbor's dog bit him. He contracted rabies. Went to the doctor. That's where he found out that, after some time that he had rabies. Went to the doctor. The doctor gave him medication. Okay. My dad flew. He didn't take the medication. Instead, he flew from Nigeria to Germany, did some business out there, and then he flew from Germany to New York because me, my brother, and my mom was out there for a little bit, just for a small vacation. He saw me and my brother and my mom, and then he flew back to Nigeria to go back to court. When he got back, he took the medication. The medication is what killed him. So in the autopsy, what was found out was that it was a combination of the medication, the rabies, but it was the medication ultimately that killed him because it was bad medication. And as soon as that happened, what's that? Oh, absolutely, 100%, 100%. Because my dad was such a force in Nigeria, nobody could stop him. He was going to win. At the end of the day, he was such a brilliant man that he was going to win. And everybody knew that he was going to win. And there's a saying in Nigeria, if you fight corruption, it's going to fight back. And my dad and that's where I get my fighting spirit from. I get it from my dad. And so, he was going to fight, and they knew that. And they knew that they had to take him out. And so I believe that he was poisoned, and he went in to go take a bath after taking the medication. He never came out. And then the maid went in to go check on him. He was dead in the bathtub. And so, and my older half brother is a lawyer, but he wasn't a lawyer then. He was just out of law school. He was just probably still in law school when my dad died. So he flew and he was in law school in the UK. So he flew from the UK down to Nigeria, but he didn't have the juice. He was a Yankee. So nobody was listening to him. He didn't have the juice to do anything. So it was a wrap. And that's when we went from rich, having absolutely everything, to poor, like literally having nothing. And my mom.
How old were you at the time?
I was 5. This was 1987.
Wow. So you do have some good memories with your father?
Yeah, a few memories of, being on his lap, him talking to me in his because he had a British accent, eating mangoes because he loved mangoes. It's so funny. I was with my youngest son. He's 3, and it's mango season. So he's been tearing up the mangoes. And this is the first year that he's gotten into mango. And I was sitting at the dining room table with him the other night, just looking at him, kind of seeing my father and him. Yeah. And I was like, your grandfather used to love mangoes. He was like, what, really? He's like, who's my grandfather? I was like, I told you about your grandfather. My dad, he used to love mangoes. And you love mangoes. And it was just a surreal moment.
Nigeria basically killed its best visionaries.
Exactly.
By doing that. It's just, wow, man. I can't imagine the things he would have done for that country, the beautiful things would have turned for them. But sometimes when you do that to people like that and you try to block everything, visionaries are just unstoppable, man. Mm-hmm. They're like a nuclear power of ideas. And wow. So at what point did you arrive in the United States, and how did that change for you? I know you were 5, but what do you remember from that big change going from to where you were and the status that your dad was on to coming to the United States to Bronx?
Yeah, to be honest with you, it wasn't that big of a it wasn't that hard of a change. It wasn't that jarring of a transition. And I say that because, one, I was young. I was 5. So I didn't understand a lot of what was going on. As a matter of fact, I remember the day that my dad died. My mom placed my brother on her right side, placed me on her left side. And she said, hey, in such a calm way, no tears in her eyes, your father's died, he passed on, he's not coming back. And my mom said it in such a calm way with no tears in her eyes that me and my brother just looked at each other and went back to playing as if nothing happened. Like, okay, because in part, like I said, we were 5, so we didn't understand death. My dad traveled a lot, so, maybe he's just going on a business trip. And the second thing was my mom was just super calm, cool, and relaxed. And she knew she had to deliver the news in that way because if she didn't, then if she was falling apart, then we would fall apart, and she would fall apart, and it would just create this never-ending cycle. And so, the transition wasn't jarring because a snapshot of that situation was how my mom was throughout that entire transition. She did a good job of masking the reality of what had happened. My mom, she was American. My mom met my dad in New York City at the Metropolitan Museum of Natural History. I tell people all the time, my mom and dad's story is a real coming to America story. Forget Eddie Murphy. My mom was this New Yorker. my dad was hitting on her at the museum, talking about he's an African prince. And then the next thing you know, they get married 5 months later, you know? And so, I say all that to say, when my dad died, my mom was like, there's no way I'm raising my kids in Africa. And that's why she brought us back to the States. So my mom was American. New York was her home. And she did a good job of really masking the realities. She kept our apartment well kept. She would work multiple jobs and so we didn't really see her struggling. We had my grandmother that helped out from time to time. A lot of my dad's art was in our apartment. So again, it wasn't jarring. It wasn't until I was about 8 years old that I really began to recognize some things. Like, for example, there were times when my mom didn't have enough food to feed herself. She had just enough food to feed my brother and I. She would put the food on the table and stand in the doorway and watch us eat and not eat with us. And so you catch on little things like that. Then, I would walk to the store through the DeVoe Park, and there's crackheads and drug dealers and, the mafia dudes with big suits going into the stores to collect taxes. I began to catch on. I would go to the rent office with my mom and watch as she would, plead in a calm way for extra time to pay the rent. And, as I got older, I began to understand what was going on. And that's when I realized the life I had, I don't have anymore. So that's kind of when it was a long stretch before before I came to the realization of what had happened.
Remi, for people that aren't familiar with that area of New York City, can you just describe like what your neighborhood was like?
Yeah, so I was in the Bronx. The Bronx is is known to be a wild area, especially in the '80s. In the '80s, the crack epidemic was out of control. Like I said, there was a park right outside. I lived in a co-op, and right outside the co-op was DeVoe Park. And DeVoe Park is a dangerous park. And so just going through the park, and it's a big park, going through the park, you got crackheads everywhere, especially in the '80s. You got drug dealers, murders happen, gangs. As a matter of fact, there was a girl who was in elementary school with my brother. And I never forget, my brother came home from school one day because she was murdered in her laundromat. So that was gunshots every night, ambulance, you hear the police sirens and ambulance sirens all night, every night. That was the situation, and going to school, walking to school, seeing people get jumped, beat up, going to the park to play basketball, me getting jumped and beat up. It wasn't easy, man. But to be honest with you, like I tell people all the time, I'm grateful for that upbringing, because if it wasn't for that, there's no way I could have made it through SEAL training. Like going through that life, that hard life, and having to really grind and put in work and duck and dive and figure things out and survive. I was conditioned to survive in the midst of the fire. So I'm grateful for that upbringing.
That transition gotta be crazy, man, to kind of go through that, to the fact that knowing that you were, you were just not the son of someone who didn't do well in life. You were the son of someone who did amazing things in life, and to find yourself in Bronx, New York, and some of the most dangerous areas in New York City. And I know you got, fast forward, your story goes down into, you were getting in a lot of trouble. You started getting older, and what really led you to starting to like lean towards trouble at that point?
Not having a father, just that simple. Trying to search for a father in things and people. I truly believe that every boy needs a man to teach him how to be a man, and every girl needs a man to teach her how to be loved by a man, so that when she comes to age, she knows how to pick them right. And I think internally, all of us are always seeking for a father. And you see it in not all pro athletes, but you see it in pro athletes as well, when they don't have a father in their life, and then they get all that money and they go into the strip club and making it rain and buying these exotic cars, and they have these big entourages and all this stuff. Like, I can relate to that, because that was a big part of my early years when I was hustling. And why does that happen? Why do people like that and people like who I used to be do those things? It's because we're seeking that affirmation. We're looking for that pat on the back from our dad. We're looking for a dad type figure or a friend or family be like, well done, son. Like, you're doing a good job. Mad respect to you. And I think that's where it all came down to. I was seeking out a father, and I found a father in the streets, hip hop music, rap culture, all that. And that influenced me heavily. I would hear rappers talking about sleeping with multiple girls and being a player. I soaked it all in. That's what I wanted to do. I would talk about, you know, I would hear dudes talk about hustling and punching people in the face if they would felt disrespected. So I fought. I would hear them rap about selling drugs. So I did that. And I started out stealing from my mom. That progressed to stealing from stores. That progressed to stealing from jobs. That progressed to selling drugs. And by the time I was 19, I was running major illegal scams where I was bringing in thousands of dollars a week. And I had people working for me. I had a crew. I had my people won't be able to see this, but this is a record company that I founded. That's me right there. I was running the money that I was making illegally into the record company, laundering the illegal money through the record company. And it all came from that. That was the path. That was what I saw and heard, you know, from my young years all the way up to that time. So that's what I felt like I needed to do. It was either like Biggie said, you either sling and crack rock or you got a wicked jump shot. And that's what led me down the path, to be honest with you.
So were you involved in a gang or multiple gangs?
No, I never did the gang thing. I always despised the gang thing. You know what I mean? Like I always had disdain for, like I always saw that as cowardice. Like to feel like you need to be with a group to have strength and juice. I would rather fight
If
alone.
you were doing all of this on your own without being affiliated with the gang, wouldn't you get like a lot of pushback?
No, because I was a hustler. So there's a difference
Oh.
between a hustler and a gang. So I had people I hustled with. You know what I mean? But I wasn't into the gang stuff. Because for me, I wasn't into the, I'm going to go jump this person. I'm going to go Devo this person and do this or that. I was into, I want to get money. Because at the end of the day, money leads to power, power leads to respect. And money, power, respect. And so that's what it was all about for me. And so I built a crew that I hustled with. And that was our whole focus, was getting money. Nothing else. All that gang bang and all that stuff, that's not us. We just trying to make this money so that we can get out of the situations that we were in.
So did you ever get into any trouble with law enforcement along the way?
You know, that's a funny story, and we can get to it when we get to how I got into the Navy. But I was always one step ahead of the law. I say this all the time. I had my dad's mind. You know, my dad was a very, like I said, he was a visionary. So I was always able to stay one step ahead of the law because I was able to visualize, oh, if I keep going down, for example, let's look at the drug thing. When I started selling drugs, I realized that, bro, there's a drug dealer on every corner. You know what I'm saying? It's saturated and cops are looking, narcs are looking for dudes. So how can I stay ahead of it? I would jump on a train and go up to upstate New York, to Poughkeepsie, New York, college campuses, college towns, and sell drugs up there. Why? Because it's low visibility. And I had a buddy of mine who I grew up with in the Bronx, who his parents moved up to Poughkeepsie to try and give him a better life. And so I had a place to stay. I blended in with the environment. I wore regular, I wasn't, standing out with the extra baggy pants and the baggy clothes and look at me, I'm a drug. I blended in and I did my thing because I was trying to stay a step ahead of the law. You know what I mean? I was trying to make sure that I wouldn't get caught up. So that's what I mean by I was a visionary in a sense, like my dad, where I was able to always stay one step ahead of everything, including the law. So I want to get caught.
Wow, man, that's just got to be crazy to go through this. I went through crazy childhood until I was 17. And then my change kind of hit me at 17 years old, right? And that's when things just turned around. Like, at what age when things really had to turn around for you?
What age? I would say 19. I'm going to turn on this light real quick.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry, it's getting dark in here.
No worries.
I would say 19, 20. 19. I got involved in a deal with a drug dealer that went bad. I sold him some products that were supposed to last for a certain amount of time. Those products only lasted for a fraction of that time. And he threatened my life. And not only was my life threatened, but my mom's life was indirectly threatened. And that was a huge wake up call for me. And along with that, there were people who were running the same type of cell phone scam that I had been running. They were getting caught, prosecuted, and sent to federal prison. And so this was all around December of 2001. So between those two circumstances, that's where I was like, man, if I don't stop, I'm gonna either end up dead or in prison. And I credit a lot of that to my mom, because one thing my mom would do is she would spank my brother and I relentlessly when we were kids. And I hated it. But one thing that did, for me at least, was it instilled this concept of consequences for actions. So I knew that if I keep doing what I'm doing, there's going to be an ultimate consequence. And one day there may be a consequence that I can't come back from. And so when that drug dealer threatened my life and my mom's life indirectly, and then there's people going to federal prison, that in a sense was a light spanking. That was like, yo, there's going to be a consequence. You got this small consequence, but if you don't stop, it's going to get worse. And so that was the wake up call for me. So for 6 months, I didn't do much of anything. I gave it all up. I made the drug dealer back his money, and I just stayed home and didn't do much of anything.
And at what point?
Fast forward to, what's up?
At what point how did you notice the U.S. military? Like, how did that come across you in the Bronx? Trying to think how you had that change. You stayed home. You started to change your life. How did the U.S. military kind of pop in your face?
Well, it came to me, rewinding a little bit. There were two movies that kind of inspired me. The first movie was Bad Boys. I saw that when I was 15. And that was the first time I was exposed to a film where I saw two dudes who looked like me. They seemed to come from where I came from, and they had like the same type of swagger that I had. But they were heroes. So that was the first time where a seed was planted in my mind that said, you could be something other than a rapper, athlete, or drug dealer. Like, you could be a hero, still maintain the character of who you are in your truest form. And then a year later, The Rock came out. And when I watched The Rock, that blew me away, because that was the first time I was exposed to Navy SEALs. I had never heard of a Navy SEAL. Like, I didn't know what a Navy SEAL was. But when I saw that movie and saw them dudes going underwater with the vehicles, and they got the black suits on and the MP5s with the suppressors, and they got the night vision goggles and all that, like, my mind was blown. I was like, that's crazy. I said to myself, man, and I was 16, and I said to myself, if I ever turn my life around, I'm gonna do that. But again, that was far-fetched. That's like me saying right now, like, I'm gonna run for president in 4 years. The chance of that happening is slim to none. So even in me saying it was a throwaway line, it was like, but fast forward to when I didn't have much going on and I was lost, man. I was really lost. That's when I really felt this call. I felt something tell me, yo, you need to get out of here. You need to join the military. And that's kind of where it began to come back up. But the interesting thing was, when I did go to the recruiter that day, and this was June of 2002, I went to the Marine Corps recruiter's office first. I went there, sat in the office for like 15 minutes because I figured I was going to join the Marine Corps. And there was this cardboard cutout of this Marine who had on all the same gear that the SEALs had on in the Rock. So I was like, oh, I heard Marines are way better than SEALs, so I'm going to do the Marine thing. But the issue was there was nobody in the office. There was coffee on the desk, but there was nobody there. So I sat there for like 15 minutes inside the office waiting for the recruiter to come back, and nobody showed up. So fast forward, 15 minutes later, I go 2 doors down to the Navy recruiter's office, and there was this beautiful Navy recruiter in there by the name of Tiana Nadine Reyes. And when I saw her, in my mind, I was like, yo, not only am I getting in the Navy, but I found me my next girl. Like, I'm a Mac on her. So here I am. I'm trying to swab her and be player like with her. And she was from the Bronx, so she recognized it. She was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. And she was like, I'm thinking that's going to impress her. And she was like, yeah, whatever. Okay, SEAL, come over here. So she had me take a practice HAZMAT test. And I took the practice HAZMAT test. I scored high enough to get in the Navy, but I didn't score high enough to get the buds. And then, the next thing she did was she ran my background check. And when she ran my background, she found out I had 2 warrants out for my arrest, to go back to your question from earlier. I had a warrant in New Jersey and I had a warrant in New York. And I was petrified. As soon as she said that, my whole body got hot. And that's what always happens to me when I get nervous or I'm in a situation that seems to be dire. Like, I get really, really hot. because I knew that there were people going to federal prison for what I was doing. I thought I had gotten away with. You got to remember, I'm 6 months removed from what I had been doing. And in my mind, when she said that, I was like, oh my God, these warrants are for what I was doing. Like, it finally caught up with me. I really didn't get away. So I got up and I got ready to run out of the office, and she yelled at me to stop. And I stopped right at the door, and she said, where you going? I said, I'm getting out of here. She said, there's nothing out there for you. I said, what do you want me to do? Stay here and go to jail? Like, I'm thinking she's going to call the cops on me. So she said, no. She said, do you have a suit? I said, no. She said, do you have a collared shirt and some nice pants? I said, I'm sure I can find something. Why? She said, come back tomorrow. I said, for what? She said, just come. She snapped at me in New York, and she was from the Bronx. She snapped and said, just come back tomorrow, okay? So, growing up in the Bronx, I learned how to read people, and that would serve me really well when I was in the teams doing the human stuff that I did. And learning how to read people, essentially, that what I got out of her response was, I'm gonna do something good for you. And I felt from her response, I didn't know what she was gonna do for me, but I just felt that it was gonna be something good. So I came back the next day, and when I came back, she was in her dress uniform. She had on her medals and everything. And she had me follow her into the government vehicle. She drove me to both judges. I'm compacting the story for the sake of time, but she drove me to the judge in New Jersey and the judge in New York, and she advocated on my behalf. She essentially said, yo, this kid's made mistakes, but he has potential. He's trying to join the military after an act of war. 9/11 had just taken place 9 months earlier. And she was like, but this guy can't join the Navy with a criminal record. Is there any way you can expunge his record and drop these charges? And both judges unanimously expunge the record, drop my charges. They say, yo, if this guy's serious about joining the military after an act of war, then yeah, we'll clear his record so he could join the Navy. And then she went a step further and fudged the paperwork to sneak me in. And that was how I got into the military. Like, that was the beginning of it. And man, I'm internally grateful to her, because what she did changed the trajectory of my life. And she died 2 years after that. She died 2 years later of an autoimmune disease. And when I found that out, it broke my heart, because everything that I am now, from making movies to writing to my family, to like, all of this came about because of her one decision to take a chance on me. So that was essentially how I got into the military.
From reading your book, I know Tiana Reyes was the change in your life, and the judges were the chance.
Yeah.
And it just and she really was that change. Sometimes God put people on your way for a reason.
100%.
And there are so many recruiters in New York could have not done that, and your life would have been a lot different. But it just goes to show sometimes people who just have a good soul and they decide to give someone a chance, and look at what they have done. And at that point, at what point did you actually join the Navy and started going through buds and all your training?
Yeah, so I joined in June of 2002. I ended up in boot camp in July of 2002. I couldn't swim. I didn't have the academic scores, and I was skinny, so I had to wait till I got to my first command, Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton. Got there, talked to my LPO, which was my supervisor, and asked her, hey, can you change my schedule? So she did. So I would work 4 hours in the morning at the clinic, the Navy Hospital clinic, had 4 hours in the afternoon to train, and then I would come back and work the night clinic until the last patient left. And I did that I was relentless. I didn't have a car. I would run 3 miles to the pool, jump in the shower, and try to figure it out. Run 3 miles back. I got an ASVAB for Dummies book. I studied that book relentlessly. I bought the Buds 234 Navy SEAL training documentary, watched that relentlessly, and took notes on how to work out, and then would go to the gym and just make up my own workouts. And I did that relentlessly until I got my Buds contract. And I checked in the Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton in January 2002. And in January 2003, I was checking out and on my way to Buds. And that's when.
Hey, Remi, can I pause you right there real quick? Because
Yeah.
I think our listeners want to know a little bit more about 9/11, how it affected your life.
Yeah.
You were 18 years old and you were living in New York at the time the
Yeah.
towers were hit, right?
Yeah, I was 19. I turned 19 August 10th, and then a
Can you
month later.
can you tell us more about that day? Because you were right there, right?
Yeah. That was, dude. I was in my bed in my apartment, in my mom's apartment, and asleep. I was asleep, And my mom ran into the room, woke me up. She was like, "We're under attack." I'm like, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about?" And she was just like, "Plane hit the building, Twin Towers." And my dad's best friend was the architect.
Mhm.
So she was like, "It hit the towers, something going on, turn on the news." So I wake up and I turn on the news and I'm watching. And I'm like, wow. And like, it was crazy. It was pandemonium. Like, you could hear sirens everywhere, everywhere, like up and down the street. It was just like there were people in this. It was crazy. It was chaos. And a girl I was dating at the time, she lived like 3 buildings down from me. And she called me up and she was like, come to my building. She was like, "I got to tell you something." So I went to her building and we went up to the roof of her building because the buildings were like 17, 18 floors. So the roof
Mhm.
was on like either the 18th or 19th floor, depending on the building. Some buildings had 17 floors, some had 18. And we get on the roof and we could see the towers from the roof. And
Wow.
she pulled out her cell phone, little flip phone, and she tried to call her cousin because her cousin was a waitress in Windows of the World, which was a restaurant on the top floor. And her cousin was at the restaurant at that time. Had two little kids. And so she's trying to call her, can't get a hold of it, can't get a hold of her. And we watched the towers come down together from the roof of the building. And they never found her cousin. Ever found her cousin. And it was, again,
Mm.
it's surreal even when I talk about it because, like I said, my dad was one of the first black men on the board of the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
And, he was friends with the architect. And then I'm connected to this girl whose cousin is in the building as we speak. And it was
Mhm.
just like, it was heartbreaking.
And
It
they
was
never made
heartbreaking.
it.
Yeah, they never found her. Never made it.
Wow.
They never found her. You
It's the
know?
stories are extremely crazy when I hear,
Yeah,
I was not in this country when 9/11 hit, and the
yeah,
stories always like it just amazed me, the stories, man, of
yeah,
all these people and how they died. And fast forward to your story, how you get into buds, and you said you watched a documentary about Navy SEALs. I'm
yeah,
trying to wonder, is that the same documentary that about Bud Class 234?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting. Like this documentary is pretty interesting.
yeah, yeah,
And I have a connection to it as well, because I end up serving with an intelligent agent who was actually part of that class.
Oh, wow,
Um,
wow, wow, wow.
yeah, and I know that it was like what 80 of them graduated out of like something,
No,
and
it was like
25,
17.
25, 25.
I thought it was like 17 out of the
Yeah,
like,
it was like a 25 of them graduated out of 80 something,
Mm.
and it was interesting that I actually served with this guy, who spent years in the SEAL team and then end up becoming like an analyst. I mean, the guy is as smart as hell. He's not just a contractor. He's an analyst. That's a big level education,
yeah.
and it's like he's in that documentary.
Wow. That's
Like,
awesome.
and I call him when that documentary, like I was watching it, and I'm like, oh my god, I just saw this dude in it. And I'm like, does he know his face is on this thing?
Mm.
And I
Yeah,
called him and he was like, yeah, bro. He's like, this is where I went to like SEAL training. So it's interesting when I hear about that documentary, and I know that documentary is the only SEAL documentary, the only documentary that ever done about butts.
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. It's a very, very good documentary,
That was a
honestly.
good one,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who are trying to join the SEAL teams have to watch this, right? And what a golden generation to learn about, like how they all ended up, where did they went?
Yeah,
Some of them who didn't make it end up becoming EOD, explosive specialists, and one of
it's
them actually
big.
died in Afghanistan.
Mm.
It's
Yeah,
a very interesting crew.
yeah.
And when you joined as someone from New York, as someone who is originally from Africa, how did you? What was the challenges that you really had in Buds?
Swims, man. Them 2 mile time ocean swims, bro. Yo, those 2 mile time ocean swims were the worst. That was hell for me. That was my kryptonite.
So,
Um,
did you know how to swim at all growing up in Bronx? Did you have
yo,
access to learn
no,
how to swim anywhere,
I
or?
didn't learn how to swim until I got to Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton. When I got to Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton, that's when I would run to the pool and 3 miles uphill to the pool and jump in the shallow end and try to figure it out. And then like after a few weeks, I humbled myself and asked the lifeguard, "Hey, can you talk me through the stroke? Can you show me the stroke?" He's like, "I can't show you the stroke, but I could talk you through it," because he had to stay in the lifeguard tower. And he began to
Mm.
talk me. That was how I learned how to swim.
So you
And
tried to
so
teach yourself, and then when that wasn't working, you were asked the lifeguard for help.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly,
I
yeah,
mean, the skills is in you. It's
yeah,
just you are trying to find the skills.
yeah,
The
bro,
skills were already there. It's genetically, or your dad, your dad's skills were amazing. All the things that he's done in Africa, and I think that you just didn't live your dad's life, but the skills were there, and you were just finding yourself daily,
yeah,
which is amazing, right? To see
yeah.
what you really got, and I bet that swimming these 2 miles were probably a lot harder than selling drugs in Bronx.
Oh, bro, 2 miles in the freezing cold ocean, dude. The passing time when I was in Buds in first phase, the passing time was 85 minutes. And you had to pass at least, at the time, you had to pass at least one time ocean swim per phase to graduate to the next phase. I was
Mm.
swimming 120 minute 2 mile time ocean swims. Like that was my finishing time, 120 minutes. Just to put things into perspective, guys who failed to swim, they were failing to swim by like 3 to 5 minutes. I was failing to swim by 35 minutes. You know what I mean? And at
Wow.
the end of every swim, I was either hypothermic or borderline hypothermic, because the Pacific, oh, a lot of people don't realize this. They think California, oh, like the water's warm, and they're not. It's not. It's
Yeah.
cold all year round, especially in the wintertime. And I was in a winter buds class. And so, I was getting full benefit. So that's why I was either borderline hypothermic or hypothermic at the end of every swim. But the thing was, I wouldn't quit though. And the instructors, they were. I remember hearing them say, "You ain't gonna last a week." Then it went from 1 week, "You ain't gonna last another week. You're not gonna." I kept hearing that every week. There was no, because they like, you're torturing yourself, Adeleke. Like you're torturing yourself by showing up and doing these swims every week. Like just quit. You're never gonna learn how to swim, so just quit. And I was just stubborn. I had that drive. I was just like, I'm not gonna quit. And it was cool because there were guys that would quit every one day. 5 guys would quit. Another day, 12 guys would quit. Another day, 20 dudes would quit. And these were all guys who had been swimming their entire life. Some of these guys were Division I swimmers.
Hmm.
But here I was, you know what I mean?
So what
Dude
was
from the
like
Bronx.
what was how did you overcome it? Like being 35-minute overtime, like what did you do that changed the game that you were able to pass this?
Yeah, so after I made it through Hell Week, Master Chief Crampton, God bless his soul, and the CEO at the time and the XO, Commander Zinke, I'll never forget, right after I finished, graduated Hell Week, and I was running off the beach, they pulled me, they said, "Adeleke, come in." They pulled me aside and they said, "Hey, now we're going to teach you how to swim." Because Hell Week is the equalizer. For those who don't know, Hell Week is 6 days, starts on Sunday, ends on Friday, straight torture. They keep you up from Sunday to Friday. You get 2 hours of sleep on Wednesday, 2 hours of sleep on Thursday. They keep you wet, cold, miserable. That's where you lose the majority of your class. So
Hmm.
typically, if a class goes in a Hell Week with like 60 guys, it's going to come out with like 15 to 20, 25 guys. If a class goes in with 85 guys, you might get 30 guys out of Hell Week. That's how bad it is. It's straight torture. And so once you make it through Hell Week, then essentially you've told your instructors that you have what it takes to be a frogman. So now it's like, all right, let us teach you how to be a frogman. And part of that was, "Hey, Remi, we're not going to let you move to the second phase of Buds, which is dive phase. Now that you made it through Hell Week, we're going to put you in hold and we're going to teach you how to swim." So for like 4 months, I was in what's called brown shirt rollback land, where all I did was swim. like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It was either in the pool working with a SEAL instructor who was like helping me with my technique, or whether it was in the ocean. That's all I did. That was my job. And that's how I eventually overcame it, was by just being consistent and learning from somebody who really knew what they were doing.
What year did you graduate SEAL training?
I eventually graduated in 2008. So that was, I mean, I know that's a long timeline because I got the buzz. I ended up getting kicked out of SEAL training in 253 when I got to die phase. There's a lot more to the story, but in short, I got too big for my britches. I was, after I had made it through Hell Week and passed my swims and got to die phase, I was in the clubs down the Gaslamp district chasing girls and telling girls I was a SEAL, and I was just super arrogant in my mind. I was just like, yo, I made it through Africa, I made it through the Bronx, I made it in the SEAL training, I made it to Hell Week. I'm a black dude from the hood, and I'm you know what I mean? I'm the only black dude in my class. I'm like, nobody can tell me nothing. That was my mindset.
It's the ego, man. It's that dangerous
It was
ego
all
that hits
ego,
somebody.
bro. It was
Remi,
all
did
ego.
you just did I hear you say you're the only black dude in your class?
Yeah, well, yeah, that made it through Hell Week. I was the
Right,
only one
because
left.
statistically, there's very few black Navy SEALs, right?
Yeah, it's less than 1%. Historically, it's been less than 1% of Navy SEALs are African American, and that's been
So you were the only black one in your entire class that made it?
Yep, in my graduating class. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
You know,
And I posted my on IG. I posted my graduation picture, and I'll send it to you if you want to use it. But there's a picture of my graduating class, and I blur out the faces of all the other guys for privacy. But you'll see, I'm the only black face in that class. You know what I mean? And my graduating class started out with 270, and only 29 of us finished.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about percentage, right? Being a minority. And I didn't know what minority among SEAL teams is until I met Gonzo.
Yeah.
I'm like, Gonzo, what is that? It's kind of crazy, man, to see like how people can challenge themselves and the things that they can do that they have within themselves that they just don't know they have it. And so you graduate in 2008, which is like that's the same year I left Iraq when the fight was ending in Iraq. And I know that you had a really runs in Afghanistan that went through, and I know you have served by the side of some of the people that actually heroically fell in Afghanistan, and you had a crazy Afghanistan deployment. What was your first combat deployment? And how did you feel going into that?
Yeah, my first one was actually Iraq.
Iraq, okay.
And I tell you what, I will never forget the very first mission that I went on. And I typically don't like talking about operations because to me that's, but I'll just keep it short for the sake of this. But I remember we did a turnover op with Team 1, and it was a DA. We going after a bomb maker. And I wasn't going to be boots on the ground, which was kind of frustrating, but I understood because I was a new guy. So essentially, I was a gunner. I was a vehicle gunner, and I never forget us. We head out to Target. We get to Target. We did vampire ops this entire deployment. So what that means is you sleep all day long, wake up like around 5, and you're going out the door for your op like around 12, 1, 2 in the morning. And so we get to Target. And the assault force goes off, wrap up this bad guy, do what they do. And I just remember being in the vehicle, just like, man, bro, that was I was blessed to do a lot of great stuff in my career. You know what I mean? Like national level taskers, all kinds of dope stuff. But looking back, that was I made it. I made it. And especially when I was on comms and I heard him say jackpot. And not only did they pull the dude off target, but they also were able to pull all the IED stuff and the bomb making material, suicide vest, all that stuff off target. I was like, I made it. Here I am, this dude that came from where I came from. And now I'm on this op. And I'm just a vehicle gunner, holding security while they go in and take down this target. But to come from where I came from, to be at this level, operating at this level, that was huge for me. that was huge for me.
You came
And you know,
far away, man.
I would go on to be able to do some cool stuff. You know, I was not just not just a SEAL. I was a medic, but I was also a human guy, which stands for human intelligence. So
Mhm.
I went to various human schools, and like I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons why I feel like I was able to excel in that field and that specialty was because I grew up in the Bronx. Because as I said earlier, you got to know how to read people, especially when you're out there hustling. And how well you know how to read people can mean the difference between life and death in the streets. And that's so true even when you operate. Because I'm running sources, I'm having meetings, I'm doing stuff I'm having conversations with bad guys. I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. And I had to know how to read people. I had to know whether to tell somebody was lying to me, or they wanted to tell me the truth, but they were scared, or they were telling me the truth, but it may seem like they're not. I had to know how to do that, because I would have these meetings and then help write out these intelligence reports, and that's what would lead to an operation. And if I wasn't reading a person the right way and I'm sending up a report that's bad, or that's not going to get vetted, I'm wasting my time. Or if I'm running a source and I'm leading him down the wrong path, that could potentially lead to him being killed. And so,
Mhm.
I feel like in my career, I got a chance to live the best of both worlds. I was able to, build intelligence packages, run sources, do all of that kind of stuff, like get eyes on. It's not like the movies where people think, you're a SEAL and you just bad guys there, you just go do it. No, it's an investigation. You gotta build an intelligence package before you can go do a mission. And I was one of the guys that did that. So I was hearing phone calls. I was seeing surveillance footage. I was meeting with the people who barely survived the slaughter. You know what I'm saying?
I
And
think
so I
people.
feel like I got to live the best of both worlds, and doing that side and working with three-letter agencies on that side, and then suiting up and kicking down doors.
People don't realize that every SEAL had like literally three jobs they have to master,
Yeah,
right? Every SEAL have
yeah,
to master three different things, whether they're preachers, whether they're EODs, whether they're medics. It's like three things you have to be mastering. So like, I do believe in my heart that after reading your book and everything, I do believe that you growing up in the Bronx, it actually contributes amazingly to what your human intelligence collection, because it's a very similar environment. When you think about the
yeah,
world in the Bronx and the kind of shady things would go around, it's exactly the same what would go in Iraq.
Yeah, kind
What
of like
yeah,
urban warfare.
it's
Yeah.
pretty similar. So I
Yeah.
think that gave Remy the advantage because he already have dealt with people in that level.
Remy, what
yeah.
year was that? Your first deployment?
Well, I try to be vague on the years just because of the stuff that I was doing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because
Uh,
I was doing human stuff, and
can you
and
just
you know
tell
I
me
really.
if it was before or after Hamidi was already back in the U.S.?
When did you come to the U.S., Hamidi?
I arrived here in July 2008.
Also, it was after.
Yeah.
So you were
Yeah,
there after Hamidi had left.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm pretty old dude, man. You know.
yeah. Yeah,
I
you
was
don't
just too
sound old, but
young. Yeah, I was too young in that war, man. That's why I
yeah,
was like, some of the SEAL guys I met in Iraq were happened to be the older generation. The guys that graduated a long time ago,
Yeah, I
back in
mean,
the
but you were
early
like
90s.
you were like 18, 19,
Yeah,
working with guys like 10 years older than you
oh,
probably.
way older.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
like
yeah,
15, 20 years
Yeah.
older than me. But it's amazing. Like I got to see different generation of SEAls. Honestly, I think that the Remy generation kind of thing, because they were closer in age, you could communicate, like you would connect with them a lot faster than older salty SEAls.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
so it really was just a amazing experience, right? To see people from different eras coming over in and out. And I want to go into your Afghanistan. I think I would say, and tell me if I'm wrong, you went to Afghanistan in 2012 or 11?
No, 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 no. That wasn't Afghanistan.
Huh?
That was that. I know what you're referring to. You referring to the op in my book, the deployment in my book, the
Yes.
book. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't say what country that was, but that wasn't
Oh,
Afghanistan. Yeah,
got you. We're not going.
that
Can
was
you
a
can you
national.
Remy,
That
can
was
you tell us the craziest thing you saw in Iraq on that deployment? The craziest thing that
oh
happened?
man. I mean, There was an ambush that was gnarly that we were in. That was a gnarly firefight. I would say this for me, and this will tie into when we get into and I know we're using a different term, but the slavery, modern
Yeah.
slavery stuff that we're going to talk about later. But we were on I was running the source, and that source, there was a pilot that got shot down. And we were trying to find
An
his body.
American pilot?
American pilot. Yeah, American
Okay.
pilot that had gotten shot down, and we were tasked to recover his body. And I was running a source that knew somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody, the game that knew where the body was. And I won't even name the group, the opposition that were
Yeah.
they were obviously hiding his body because they knew that we don't leave our brothers behind or sisters behind.
Mhm.
So they were intentionally trying to hide the body and so on and so forth. So anyway, I get a GPS grid from a source. He got this grid from another guy as to where this body was. Get out to this point, start digging, and it was actually kids, dead kid, corpse.
Oh, you're digging up children's bodies?
It was a kid. It was one or two. If my memory serves me right, it was one or two kids. Their bodies have been buried and decomposed out there. So we didn't know where the bodies came from. We didn't know if this was trickery, we were set up or what. But I would just say that was probably an eye-opening thing for me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how the kids were killed. I don't know what happened, but the fact that somebody would do something as evil as that, you're trying to recover a fellow soldier,
Yeah.
and they're leading you to some dead kids, or dead kid.
Yeah.
I think the majority of our audience is probably in America.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of Americans don't really understand about other places in the world is not everybody has the same value of human life
Yeah.
as we do in
Yeah.
America.
I mean, Iraq is wild. Iraq has like the first, like literally the first you could say 6-7 years of war was just completely chaos. A lot of children died, a lot of people were killed horrifically. And yeah, human life, unfortunately, in that side of the world is absolutely has just no worth to it.
Mm.
So what do you see is really that's what the reality is, the harsh reality. I think most of the things that bothers me to this day is actually the dead children in your scenes, and that's something that you can never forget about for the rest of your life, unfortunately. And Remy, back to your story is, how did you get into filmmaking?
Yeah, man.
I mean, your
Well, that
dad
was
visionaries was
yeah,
growing buildings, growing islands.
yeah.
How the hell did you get into filmmaking, man?
Yeah, man, that was, dude. I tell people all the time, I didn't get into it; it got into me. I wasn't going
Yeah.
after it. My first son was born in 2014. My second son was born in 2015, and I was like, "Yo, it's time for me to get out." I had a great run. I had 3 deployments. Good times, and now it was like I needed to be able to be home with my kids. My 2 sons my dad had died when I was young, as you guys have already mentioned. And I felt like I wanted to be home with my son. So I got out in January 2016. And when I got out, I was actually in grad school. I was getting my master's in organizational strategy. I eventually finished, but I was planning on going into business consulting. I had a brother-in-law, well, I have a brother-in-law who he's a very successful multimillionaire. Multiple businesses started, successful businesses. And so he hired me, and he had friends who would hire me to do business consulting. So to go into a company, look at their strengths, weaknesses, and try to deal with those weaknesses and help them create a plan to maintain the strengths, and take principles like leadership, communication, teamwork, all that stuff that we have to apply in special operations and translate them into business principles. So that's what I was doing. And that's why I went to grad school, because I was like, I don't want to be the guy that's doing this consulting from the perspective of just being a SEAL. I want to be a guy who has the concepts, theories, terminologies, all of that in my head. I can speak to it from an academic standpoint, as well as from an operational standpoint. So I was in grad school and got out January 2016. May of 2016, I'm in my office writing papers for school, and my phone rings. There's a lady on the other line who works with Michael Bay, and she's like, "Hey, Bay's looking for somebody with your background to work on Transformers." I'm like, "When?" She's like, "Tomorrow." I'm like, "Sure." She asked me to send her some pictures. I sent her some pictures of me in my military uniform. She was like, "Good enough. You got the job." And it was just supposed to be one day on Transformers the last night, and that one day turned into 3 weeks, and then that 3 weeks turned into 6 months. And I was on that film from day one of shooting to December, which was 6 months later, last day of shooting. And
Wow,
that
that's
was
crazy.
that was
That's a really big movie. What was your role in the movie? Were you just an advisor, or were you actually acting in the movie?
So I was acting in it, but I had a consulting role as well. So I was doing acting and some consulting as well. So that was my first gig.
And
And
let me
how would
And
we recognize you in the movie? Like what part did you act?
I was the guy with there's a scene with Mark Wahlberg, a standoff scene where you know he has his gun pointed. I have my gun pointed at him. It's like a shooting standoff, and then like Bumblebee comes and knocks us out. And then there's another scene where I jump off of the planet with this girl, Izzy. That was her character's name. Her real name is actually Isabella. I jumped off of the planet with her tandem to
Yeah,
me, and I said, "We going home, Izzy." There's
yeah,
another
Oh
scene where
yeah, I
she
think I remember that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's
yeah.
another scene where she comes up to me and
And
I have this bazooka AT4 and she's like, "Does that thing kill Decepticons?"
and
And I pick it up and I say, "Nah, we do." And then I walk off. So
that's
so
crazy.
Wow.
And let me just say that, man, that the Transformer movie got themselves a real Transformer,
yeah, 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 yeah,
because you are a Transformer. You know,
yeah, yeah,
you aren't
yeah. My life
Transformer
is transformed.
in a way. You are a real Transformer because you
Yeah,
transform your
man.
life into something magical, man. How one day I'm going back from a speaking event, and I know that Remy just does movie consulting and does beautiful jobs with all these movies that Remy have done, like Six Underground with Ryan Reynolds and
Yeah,
the Transformer itself. And by the way, Remy done a
Asians,
great job,
Yeah, I've worked on a bunch of
great
stuff.
job consulting in these movies. These are, if you watch these movies really, you see that the part that Remy like really put his expertise on, these are well done. Like I really looked for one little detail mistake on these things, and they don't exist in these movies. Of course, people just enjoy the movies.
Yeah,
As someone out myself, also worked in movies consulting. You'll see everything. I mean, it was to the dot. It was perfect, and that's truly it's just a whole another skill set how to really consult in movies in Hollywood. So one day I'm going back from a speaking event, and me and Remy have talked in the past,
yeah, yeah.
and on different things and different topics. And I got on the plane, I sat in my chair, and the plane was literally on the runway about to take off. And Remy sent me a message and he was like, "Send me your number right now." And I was like, "Okay," send my number. And literally I'm in the plane, and Remy gets on the phone, and I'm like, "Remy, I'm about to get off on the, take off." And that's what my plane is about. And Remy said to me, and he's like, "Hey man, look, I'm working in this movie. I have this movie coming up, and I'm directing this movie." So I was like, "Look, I'm gonna get off. As soon as I land this plane, I'm gonna call you back." And I kept thinking the whole flight, right? And I'm like, I know he's consulting. Like I know he's a good consultant. I was like, but this time he is filming a movie. He's directing a movie. And I was like, it was such a like feeling because you're like, that's gonna be his first movie, and he's calling me. And I was like, I better like show up and put all my skills to the table. People know that I speak multiple languages, and I've worked with the US intelligence as an asset overseas. So I was wondering through the whole flight into what Remy really wants from me. And as soon as I landed, I called Remy back, and we went through the idea of directing a movie, right? And I was like, the things that Remy asked me to do in his movie, I don't think anybody can do that on the period amount of time that Remy asked me to do these things. It was just like, it sounds like Mission Impossible, but I was like, damn, for the first movie after everything you've been through in your life, and you're asking me to do this. I said yes, and it was crazy. It was insane for me to say yes to the things that he was asking me to do. It was almost next to an impossible thing.
Yeah.
He asked me, he's like, "Can you do this? And if you can't do it, it's okay." And I said, "You know what? No, I can do this." And we got into it, and I'll let Remy finish the rest.